Okay, moving on, I'm going to look at some checkmates at the 5 or 6 level. If you like, when I say that one side can mate, you can pause the video and try to solve it, but I'm not going to actually say stop and pause the video. So first, let's just look at some terrible moves that generally allow checkmate. So let's suppose black here did g5, knight h6. These are all taken from actual games between weak players. That explains why they might look random. Let's suppose black plays b6, bishop a6, bishop takes e2, bishop takes f1. Then white can now checkmate. d5, d6, d takes e7, bishop takes g5, and now e takes d8, queen. This is one of the patterns I was talking about where you guard either a queen or a promoted pawn on d8 with a bishop, and therefore checkmate. Looking at another example, e4, d5, e5, d4, bishop g5, bishop takes d8, bishop g4, bishop takes d1, and now black should really take the bishop on d8, but let's suppose he doesn't and tries to take the bishop on f1 instead. Then it's rather obvious this bishop is extremely dangerous, and white can checkmate with e takes d5, d6, d takes c7, c8, queen, and bishop to h4, discovering on the king, and he has nowhere to go. So that is a checkmate. Looking at some more examples, here's a back rank example, d4, e6, bishop e7. This is obviously terrible because it just lets the bishop go right through and eat both a queen and a piece. Bishop g5 takes e7, takes d8. Knight f6, knight e4, knight takes f2, knight takes d1. Again, ignoring this bishop on d8 is not a good idea. a4, rook a3, rook h7, rook takes h7, rook takes h8 is a checkmate as the bishop covers e7. Let's see, in one final example, if white plays knight c3, black plays knight c6, d5, not the best move, but again, we're showing games between weak players. e4, e takes d5, f3 to stop mate on f2. Queen takes d5, queen takes f3, e5, queen takes d1, king takes d1, d4, d takes e5, bishop e5, bishop takes c6, check. And now black can checkmate prettily in 6 moves, if you want to try to find it. With bishop d7, castles long. Should point out that castling follows the same rules as in regular progressive chess, or sorry, regular chess. Bishop b4, bishop takes c3, bishop g4, double check, and mate with the bishop covering the e1 square, and the rook and the bishop combining to cover the rest. So it takes a few games of playing to really get a feel for a lot of these mating patterns, but that should be a good introduction. For the rest of the video, I'm going to look at some problems, series mate problems, which are 7 and 8 moves in length, and it will be different sides to play and win. And you can pause the video and try to solve them. Some of them will be quite difficult. Okay, so moving on, I'm going to show some 7 and 8 length problems. These are taken from an online guide to progressive chess that I wrote back in 1997, 1998. That website's no longer available, but I think it's probably more valuable in video form anyway. Okay, so this first problem should give you some idea of just how cool and beautiful progressive chess can be, especially Fisher random progressive chess. This is a series mate in 7 problem that I composed based on an analysis line in an actual Fisher random game that I played, Fisher random progressive game. And if you want to pause the video and try to solve this one, I'll give a hint in a couple seconds. Okay, so here's your hint if you're having trouble solving this problem. This unlike many 7s and 8s where moves can be made in any given order, for example, you can move a bishop first and then a knight first, what makes this problem beautiful is that all 7 moves, there's only one order, there's only one solution, and in fact one unique order for these moves. All 7 moves have to be played in an exact order in order to solve this problem. So I'll give the solution here in another couple seconds. Alright, so the first thing you notice here is that Black's king is a bit uncomfortable in the long diagonal. But again, we can't play e6 without it being check, and that would end our series. So the first thing we want to do is to block this line. Knight f3, knight to d4. So that's how we spend our first 2 of our 7 moves. Now the e-pawn is free to move, so we play e6, e7, e takes f8. And this is our 3rd, 4th, and 5th moves. Now notice here that if we made a queen, then that would deliver check, so that would end our series early. So instead we make a rook, and now we play rook to h8, covering the key squares on the h file, and finally knight e6 double check, and the bishop on a1 protects the rook on h8. The king has to move, g6 is covered by the pawn, and the h file is covered by the rook, and f8 is covered by both the rook and the knight, so this is a very beautiful checkmating problem. Moving on to another series mate in 7 problem. This one is not really as beautiful in the sense that white is obviously already winning this game materially. Although the black pawns do look dangerous, it's likely that white has a material series that would just win here. But nonetheless, white can checkmate in 7 moves if you want to try to solve it on your own. This is another very difficult problem. I'll give a hint in a couple seconds. Alright, so my hint is that the checking square that you want to deliver check from is e6. Okay, moving on. I'll give the solution. First, it's rather obvious that white can't deliver checkmate on the back rank because of the bishop on d7, which can block at either c8 or e8. This is a common defensive configuration to put a bishop or a knight in front of the king where they can block on either side, and the king is actually quite safe on the back rank. In this particular case, white has to mate with pieces. So the first step is to actually capture the annoying bishop with bishop b5, bishop d7, and then play rook f1 takes f7. That's 4 moves, and now any 3 moves with a knight to get to e6 are fine. So for example, knight g6, knight f4, knight takes e6, and this is a pretty checkmating pattern where c7 and d8 are covered by the knight, and the rook and the bishop conspire to cover the remaining squares. Moving on to a third mating problem. This position is white to mate in 7 moves. I'll let you guys pause the video and try to solve it. Alright, so the solution here, it should be obvious that if we can get a knight to c5, that's a pretty powerful thing to do. But the problem is that we've got a bishop on f8 that can just take it. So we should be looking at ways to obscure or obstruct that line. And there are quite a few ways to do this. Essentially, we want to put one knight on d6, another knight on c5, and play bishop g5. And there's a variety of ways to do this. The solution's not unique, but it takes 7 moves. So I'll just look at one example. Knight a3, knight b5, knight d6, bishop g5. We have 3 moves left. Knight f4, knight takes e6. We could also have gone to d3, and knight c5. And this is a very pretty pattern with the 2 knights and the 2 pawns like this. And the black king is completely stuck and has nowhere to go. Okay, so one final mating problem. This is not a particularly difficult one. It's a very typical pattern that you see either with 2 rooks or with a promoted pawn and a rook. What makes this interesting is that white's king is in check from the pawn on c7, so he has to do something about that. So he really only has 7 remaining moves to checkmate. So if you want to try to solve this, you can pause the video. Okay, so the key square here that you should be looking at is c2, and the fact that the white pawn on e3 prevents the king from getting out. If that pawn weren't there, there wouldn't be any checkmate, but it is. So first we can play king takes c7 as the first move, and then move the king out of the way with the second move, king d6. So we have 6 moves left. Bishop f5 for the third move, rook b8 for the fourth move, rook takes b2 for the fifth move, rook b1 for the sixth move, rook c8 for the seventh move, and finally rook takes c2. And note that white would be able to go to e3 if he hadn't blocked in his king like that. But as it is, the back rank and the second row are all covered, and the bishop covers d3 and the rook covers c3, so the king is in checkmate. Usually on the 7 and 8 there are many patterns like this. If the king's on the back row, there's lots of ideas with promoting pawns that with a rook combined with on the second rank to checkmate. Oftentimes you see patterns on the 7 or 8 where you have things like this with the double rooks. In addition, sometimes on an 8 the pawn can promote, and then you still maybe have a couple of moves to play with. So you see patterns where a queen promotes on like g1 and then mates a king on e3, for example, with backed up by like a rook on c3 or something. So this should give you some idea of the beauty of the checkmates in progressive chess. Every time your series rolls around, it's very fun to try to figure out if you're mating the opponent or not, which if you're playing correspondence chess, it's rather obvious, but if you're playing blitz, you often have to find a balance between being able to find a checkmate and just trying to cop out and make a series that wins material. So hopefully this introduction has got you interested in progressive chess. In my next video, I'm going to talk about the tactic of ghosting, which is the Scottish progressive chess tactic of forcing an opponent to give check on the first move of their series. And usually this is the equivalent to checkmate, and if you can't mate your opponent, it's the next best thing. It should also win the game immediately. Since this video is already getting long, I'll save that for the next video, and I hope you guys enjoyed this.